Hello and welcome to this short presentation where I want to talk about how to allocate the costs of your agents. So let's start first with the concept and the idea behind. So first, the concept. So what's the issue? So we have an agent, agent A, and this agent is used by different people from different departments. So let's say from somebody from HR, finance, and other departments. And then the one who built this agent is IT, let's say, and IT has costs. And of course, what they want is they want to shift these costs to the different departments like HR, finance, and so on. And they certainly do not want to do it only for agent A, but also for all the other agents and things they created for this HR, finance, and other departments or cost centers. Now, how do we allocate the costs that we have for this agent? And I'm focusing here only on the message consumption. So, first idea that I had was, hey, why don't you use the pay-as-you-go billing plan that we have available in Copilot Studio and track the cost per cost center? Now, well, I found out that's probably not working. Why? Because this pay-as-you-go billing is per environment, and in an environment you typically have a couple of agents, not only one. If we would follow this principle, this means you would have for each cost center you would have separate agents in separate environments. So you will end up with a mess of environments that are hard to manage. And the other thing is, if people from other cost centers are using your agent, then the whole thing is getting messy because then you would have to do internal cost calculations and so on. So that's not something I will follow in the next steps. Then the next idea that I had was, hey, let us ask the user to enter the cost center number when they interact with the agent. Great. So we can track that, what they interacted with. But this is not working for automatic agent transactions. So if you have an automatic trigger, something runs every Monday morning, 8 o'clock, nobody is going to enter the cost center. So what I came up with was a kind of compromise. And what is the compromise? Well, I said, hey, let's enter the cost center number when somebody interacts and enforce the user to enter this number, or the name or whatever you have. In my case, I just said the cost center. And then for manual interaction, so if somebody wants to chat with our agent, force them to enter this cost center. For automatic transactions, you enter a dummy cost center, so a fallback cost center that we allocate in a second step. So how is that done? Well, first, the agent setup. What did I do? First thing is I added here a new topic, and in this topic, I asked, hey, what's your cost center? And to make sure that this is used, I put here in the instructions that the user has to enter his cost center when they interact with the agent. So that's easy. But that's not sufficient. So what other configurations do we have to take? Let's have a look. And what I want to focus on here is the conversation transcript table. Let me show it to you. That's the table. And in this table, there is a column called content. And in this column, that's very long one, the field values, these hold the different interactions that you have. So whenever you chat, so for example, what is the current gold price here? Then it does something. And then if you scroll down further here, you will see the answer and some follow-up questions. But all of the context of our transactions is there. But then you see two other columns. One is the cost center. So this is the one that is entered or automatically filled. And then I have here something about the tokens. And the question is, of course, how did I get these entered? Because these are additional columns that I modified and added to this table. So let's have a look. So what did I do? Well, I said, hey, whenever there is a new record created in this table, I run two prompts. The first one, let's have a look. The first one says, hey, you extract this cost center from this conversation. And this is the conversation field that we saw, this long field. And then you return the cost center number. If there's nothing, enter 100. And I had a strange use case where there was this number identified, and I said, hey, don't use it because that's not a cost center. Use 100 instead. The other thing, the token estimation says, hey, also have a look at this input, the same conversation field, and then estimate how much tokens would be used. Of course, I know Copilot Studio is not using tokens, it's using credits to calculate the consumption. But you will see later that this is not something critical. It doesn't really matter actually. But let's go further. So now let's go to the cost allocation process. How does that work? Well, now we have the tokens consumed, we have the cost centers. What we do not have is the total cost. So where do we get the total cost? Yeah, typically from an ERP system, from an accounting system, where you create an interaction. I don't have that, so I said, hey, I enter it manually when I run the cost allocation. But it's something you can easily adjust. Now let's go one step further. So once we have this information, we can run the cost allocation. That's actually all sufficient, and we can go to our controlling finance accounting system and run this cost allocation with our information. So to run this allocation, you can use ERP system, finance cost accounting, Excel, an agent, or something else. And of course, I wanted to test out, hey, how does this work with another agent? I created a specific cost allocation agent to execute this task. And now, from a theoretical perspective, how does that work? So maybe some of you are familiar with costing sheets in accounting. They typically have cost centers here on top. So I have IT, HR, finance. They have a measure. In my case, it's token consumed. Typically, if you allocate other costs, you have the number of people, the number of square meters, and so on and so forth. So in my case, it's token consumed. That's the measure. And the total cost in my example here of the IT department would be 30,000. I don't care about the others now. I just care about this cost allocation. And the principle is like this. So you take this 30,000 and reduce it to 0 because we want to allocate the cost from IT to the other departments depending on the number of tokens consumed. And well, the mathematics is here very easy. So here the total cost would be 0 for IT, but for HR and finance, they would be 10 and 20,000. So that's the basic principle, but it's based on an assumption. And the assumption is that the tokens consumed, then the estimation that I did, that this estimation is a good approximation for the Copilot Studio credits consumed. That's something we need to have. It's the same if you say, hey, we are in cost accounting, we allocate the heating costs based on the number of people that are working in a department. Well, it might not be perfect, but it's a good approximation. And here I'm using the same principle. And actually, the number of credits consumed, they must not be identical to this number, but they must be equivalent, so that we have a good approximation to do the cost allocation. So keep that in mind in the following. And then what did I do for this cost allocation process? Well, I created here a flow, an agent flow. So this is my cost allocation agent, the one with the number 3. I have a flow here, and this flow is doing two things. It has a prompt that is using the cost allocation, and then further down we will see in a minute that it also creates some documents. So let's have a look what this prompt is doing. Well, it says, hey, look into this table, look into the number of tokens, look in the cost center, and look at the basically at the current months. And then I want you to distribute the total cost of the IT department to the others based on and return cost center, number of tokens, and cost allocated. So that's what I want to have basically in a kind of table. And that's a simple costing sheet approach that you know from finance and controlling. But then if we follow this approach and execute only this step, you will see that there is something left on the cost center 100. That's our dummy or fallback cost center, where people do not enter manually their cost center because it's an automatic transaction. So what did I do? I entered this element here on the bottom. And in accounting terms, or if you're from finance, that's nothing else than an iteration. So I say, hey, take a look at this table and make sure that the cost center 100 has 0 cost. So once I have that, I'm having here some additional information, but the most important thing is here this invoice generation. So I create internal invoices. So it's not going to a customer, it's just an internal invoice information. I take the cost center, the number of token and the costs for my HR department, for purchasing department, for any department where people from this department use my agent. And then I said, hey, generate a sample invoice. Of course, technically, that's what I'm creating in the following is not really a sample invoice. It's not something for tax offices. It's something internal. But let's have a look together at how this looks like and what is the outcome. Okay, so I'm here in my demo system and I just opened one of the agents that I use in this environment. It doesn't matter what kind of agent you have. The important thing is that you have a conversation with your agent and that you raise some credits and consume some messages, basically. And you can do that in different ways. So, for example, I'm doing that often here from M365, but it doesn't matter. What matters, of course, is the outcome. So whenever you have a transaction, then you will have a result in this conversation table. And that's what I showed you before. And what you can also see here is that we have different agents. I have this agent and this one and this one. If we scroll down further, we will see others. But for all of them, I am calculating cost center and number of tokens. Of course, if the cost center like here is manually entered, then I know that. But hey, if I'm not knowing that because it's an automatic process, then an estimation happens. And the estimation is just that I use cost center 100. Okay, so that's the first point. And with this information, that would already be sufficient for a cost accountant to do the cost allocation in their accounting system, which can be, for example, Microsoft Dynamics, the F&O system, or you can do it in SAP or other systems. But what I wanted to do is something different, of course. Before we dig into details, let's have a quick look at my configuration. So I said I use a Power Automate flow. That's this flow. And the details, I open it already. I basically run this prompt here to extract the cost center. And you see here, that's the content. That's this column that I mentioned that holds the complete conversation. And then I have here another one that also looks at the content and estimates the number of tokens. The prompts, I showed that already. They are just here, just normal, as you might be familiar with. So here's the one that I showed in the PowerPoint. And of course, you can change the model that you use. But I use just the simple ones. Also for this token estimation, I used a different one because this was a bit more complex and I thought, hey, better use a more sophisticated model. Okay, but the story does not end here, of course, because the next step is that I'm using here my cost accounting agent. So this one here with the number 3, this is the one that executes the cost allocation. And you can see here from my last run what I did. I said, hey, run the cost allocation. And then I entered the costs. I had to enter it twice because sometimes I did a mistake or something, or I did not recognize it. But this 50,000, that would be the total costs that I want to shift from IT to the other departments depending on the consumed tokens, so to say. How does that work in the background? Again, here, very simple flow. Here is when an agent calls the flow, that's where you grab the total cost of IT. Then we have this cost allocation prompt. Let's have a look again, just to remember how it looks like. Cost allocation prompt. And that's the most crucial one. But you see, I still use the very simple model for that because it's actually just plain mathematics that happens in the background. And with that, I have then here at the bottom another prompt that generates the documents, and then I create files. So at the end of the day, I get here on OneDrive the invoice files, so to say, the internal invoices that I can send out to my different departments. So here's department 124, yeah? And they would get an invoice. Of course, I know that's not technically an invoice, it's just a document with the information included, but you can convert that easily into an internal invoice. But here I just wanted to highlight the number of tokens consumed and the cost allocated. And I did that for the other departments. And here I see the total. So the total is 50,000. That's what we wanted to allocate. And in this last month, I consumed 3,534 tokens. That's my allocation basis, so to say. And of course, hey, you can say, hey, Ludwig, yeah, how do I know that this really matches? And because of that, I did some calculations in Excel to show you what is the outcome. So here is the result from the different Word documents that I have. In the Word document, you saw the total cost, 50,000, and the number of tokens, 3,500. And then I have here the cost centers. And here are the costs. So at cost center 100, there is no cost remaining. And at the other cost centers, you can see that we do not fully allocate 50,000. So there's a rounding error. But that's something that you typically see in finance and accounting, where you say, hey, okay, I'm living with this rounding error. Okay, so that's basically the process that I wanted to show you. So starting from a conversation that you have with your agent, maybe in Teams or maybe in M365, via the conversation transcript table, and then some smart prompts, you can do the cost allocation in or with the help of an agent. Let me go back to my PowerPoint for some important and closing remarks. Okay, so after this short demo, let's have a look at some things that you can possibly improve. And the first thing is, of course, rather than starting this allocation process manually, you could do it automatically, because that's something you do typically on a monthly basis. Then next thing is, I entered the IT costs manually, this 50,000. But of course, what you would typically do is create an integration, a connection to your ERP system, and then have these costs automatically fed in. Then next thing, the documents that I created. Of course, you can make them more look like real invoices, make them look nicer, better, and send them out automatically by using the same agent flow that we used. And finally, of course, what you could also do is you could automatically post the internal cost allocations in your ERP system. So this would typically be a part of your cost accounting system, because at the end of the day, your company is not getting richer or poorer from that. It's just an internal allocation or cost calculation. But this is something you can easily do and integrate. Okay, but that's all what I wanted to share with you. I hope you found it interesting and insightful. And as usual, thanks for watching and listening.